Listen closely, my friends. There is a moment, and every single person watching this has lived it, where the ground beneath you disappears. Not slowly, not with warning. It happens in a phone call that takes 30 seconds to end your world, in a betrayal that comes from the person who slept beside you, in a diagnosis, a termination letter, a silence where there used to be love, in a moment so sudden that your nervous system doesn't even know whether to fight, flee, or simply collapse on the floor of whatever room you're standing in. And in that moment, that exact moment, the entire architecture of who you thought you were gets tested. Most people fail that test, not because they are weak, but because they were never trained. They were taught mathematics. They were taught history. They were taught how to drive a car, how to file taxes, how to present themselves in a job interview. But nobody sat them down and said, "Here is how you remain yourself when the world tries to unmake you." The ancient Stoics knew something that we have forgotten. They knew that there are two kinds of human beings walking this earth. The first kind is built from the outside in. Their mood is a mirror of their circumstances. When life is good, they are good. When life breaks, they break. They are, in the deepest philosophical sense, slaves, not to other people, but to events, to opinions, to outcomes they cannot control. They have outsourced the governance of their own inner life to the chaos of the external world. The second kind is built from the inside out, and these people, these rare, extraordinary human beings, carry within them something the Stoics called the hegemonikon, the ruling faculty, the sovereign mind, a center of gravity so deep, so anchored, that no storm above the surface can reach it. Marcus Aurelius ruled the most powerful empire on earth. He lost children. He fought plague. He was surrounded by men who wanted him dead. And yet, every morning before Rome woke up, he sat alone and wrote to himself, not to posterity, not to impress anyone, just to remind himself of what mattered. Those writings became what we now call the Meditations. And in 2,000 years, we have produced nothing wiser. Epictetus was born a slave, not metaphorically, a literal slave, with a master who once broke his leg as an experiment in cruelty. And as his bones snapped, Epictetus looked up and said calmly, "I told you it would break." His master expected screaming. He got philosophy, because Epictetus had already discovered something his master would never understand. You can own a man's body and still have no power over his mind. Seneca watched emperors order his execution, twice. He was exiled, stripped of his wealth, condemned to death by Nero, a man he had tutored. And in the hours before he opened his veins, he consoled his friends. Because his peace did not live in his circumstances, it never had. These were not superhumans. They were not born extraordinary. They were trained, disciplined, forged, by a philosophy so precise, so ruthlessly practical, that it functions less like a belief system and more like a technology of the self. And today, right now, you are going to receive that technology. Not surface-level tips, not a motivational montage, not just breathe and think positive. I am going to share 10 laws, drawn from 2,000 years of Stoic philosophy, each one a weapon against the chaos that is coming for you, because it is coming. It always does. The only question is who you will be when it arrives. Stay with me, because what follows will not just change how you handle stress, it will change how you understand what you are. Law 1. The law of the inner citadel. In 168 BC, the Greek city of Corinth was razed to the ground by Roman legions. Every building, every temple, every library burned. The people enslaved or slaughtered. A civilization erased. Among the survivors was a philosopher named Crates. He had lost everything a man can lose. And yet, by all historical accounts, he walked out of the ashes unchanged in the only way that matters. His mind remained his own. How? Because Crates understood something that Marcus Aurelius would later articulate with devastating precision. You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength. The Stoics built their entire philosophy on a single architectural metaphor, the inner citadel, the acropolis of the self, a fortress at the center of your being that exists on different terrain than everything else in your life. Your job exists outside, your relationships exist outside, your reputation, your money, your health, all outside, all subject to siege, all capable of being taken. But the citadel? The citadel is the one place no army can breach, because it exists not in the world, but in the dimension of volition, of choice, of conscious response. The philosopher Pierre Hadot, who spent his life studying Marcus Aurelius, described this as prosos, a Greek word meaning total, undivided attention to the present moment and to the quality of one's own inner movements. Not attention to what is happening around you, attention to what is happening inside you. Here is the law stated plainly. Between stimulus and response, there is a space. In that space lives your freedom. Most human beings have collapsed that space to zero. Something happens. They react. Instantly, automatically. The insult lands and the anger fires. The bad news arrives and the anxiety floods in. The disrespect occurs and the ego reaches for its weapons. They are not responding. They are ricocheting. The Stoic practice, the daily, rigorous, exhausting practice, is to rebuild that space, to stretch it, to make it wider each day until it becomes not a moment, but a room you can walk around in, a room where you look at what just happened, consider its actual significance, consult your values, and then decide how a person of character would respond. This is not passivity. The Stoics were warriors and emperors and statesmen. Seneca was one of the most powerful men in Rome. This is not about doing nothing. It is about doing the right thing for the right reasons from an unshaken center. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "The object of life is not to be on the side of the majority, but to escape finding oneself in the ranks of the insane." The insane, to him, were not the mad. They were the people who had surrendered their inner citadel to external events, who let the world run them rather than running themselves. Tonight, before you sleep, recall one moment today where you reacted automatically, where the space collapsed to zero. Don't judge it, just see it clearly. Then ask, what would I have done if I had paused for 3 seconds first? That 3-second pause is the doorway to the citadel. Walk through it often enough, and it becomes your home. Law 2. The law of dichotomy. Epictetus opens the Enchiridion, his entire philosophical manual, with one sentence, not a warm-up, not an introduction. The whole truth stated immediately, the way a surgeon announces a diagnosis. Some things are in our control and others not. 5 words. Or 8, depending on translation. And in those words, the entirety of human suffering is diagnosed and its cure prescribed. The Stoics called this the dichotomy of control. 2 realms, completely separate, no overlap. In your control, your judgments, your desires, your aversions, your values, the quality of your attention, the direction of your will. These are yours. They belong to you the way your thoughts belong to you. No one can reach in and take them without your permission. Not in your control, your body, your reputation, your wealth, other people's opinions, the outcome of your efforts, whether you get the job, whether they love you back, whether the rain falls on your wedding day. And here is where the philosophy cuts deepest, because Epictetus does not say, try to have some influence over external things. He says something far more radical. He says, treat what is not yours as if it does not concern you, not as if it doesn't matter. It can matter. It can matter enormously, but its outcome is not yours to carry. The Roman general Pompey, before a great sea voyage during a storm, was told it was too dangerous to sail. His response became one of the most Stoic sentences ever spoken by a man who was not himself a philosopher. It is necessary to sail. It is not necessary to live. He had separated the decision, which was his, from the outcome, which was fortune's. He could control the choice to sail. He could not control the sea, and he refused to hold his peace hostage to what the sea might decide. This is not fatalism. The Stoics were not passive. They worked, they planned, they fought, they strategized. But they invested their emotional energy only in what they could actually govern. Everything else, they held the way you hold water. Cupped hands, no grip, no clenching, present but not grasping. Seneca, in a letter to his friend Lucilius, described what he called the reserved will, the practice of pursuing every goal, every relationship, every endeavor, but with the mental footnote, fate permitting. Not as a defeat, as a liberation. Because the moment you stop measuring your peace by outcomes you cannot guarantee, you become unkillable by failure. The Stoics called the alternative passion, not passion in the modern romantic sense, but in the original Greek, pathos. Suffering caused by placing your happiness in things outside your control. When you are devastated by rejection, it is not the rejection that destroys you. It is the belief that your peace of mind was stored in someone else's decision. You stored your treasure where thieves could reach it. Write 2 columns. Label them, mine and not mine. Everything you are currently anxious about, every source of stress, every fear, every resentment, put it in one of the 2 columns. Then look at the not mine column. That is not a list of things to ignore. It is a list of things to release. Genuinely release, not suppress, release. Because the energy you were spending on them, it is now available for the column that actually matters. Law 3. The law of memento mori. The Roman general, upon returning from a great military victory, would ride through the streets of Rome in triumph, the crowd screaming his name, flowers thrown beneath his chariot wheels, the entire city in celebration. And behind him, standing close enough to speak in his ear, was a slave, whose only job, whose singular purpose in that entire ceremony, was to repeat, continuously without pause, a single phrase. Memento mori, remember that you will die, not to diminish the victory, not as a curse, as a gift, as the only correction powerful enough to keep a man from being destroyed by his own glory. Because Rome had learned, through bitter historical experience, that the men who forgot they were mortal became tyrants, became delusional, became undone by the very success that was meant to elevate them. The Stoics made death not a subject to avoid, but a daily companion. Marcus Aurelius, in the Meditations, meditates on death with a frequency that would alarm a modern psychologist and enlighten an ancient one. He writes about the deaths of emperors before him, men who thought their names would live forever, whose very names he can barely remember. He uses this not to despair, but to calibrate, to see the present moment in its actual scale. Seneca's entire philosophical project was, in many ways, a preparation for death. Not a morbid one, a liberating one. He wrote, "Let us prepare our minds as if we had come to the very end of life. Let us postpone nothing." Because the man who has made peace with death has made peace with time. And the man who has made peace with time is never in a hurry to be somewhere else. He is entirely here, in this moment, which is the only moment that has ever existed. The Stoics practiced what they called melete thanatou, the meditation on death, specifically the practice of imagining your last day, not to terrify yourself, to clarify yourself, to ask, if this were my last conversation, would I have it the way I'm having it? If this were my last hour, Would I spend it on this anxiety? If this were my last day, what would I suddenly realize didn't matter at all? That list, the list of things you would release on your last day, is the list you should probably release today. Because here is the Stoic insight that cuts to the bone. We are already dying. Every moment cells are ending. Every day the number decreases. The question is not whether death is coming. The question is whether you will let that fact make you real, present, honest, alive in a way that people who avoid the thought of death never quite manage to be. Alexander the Great, according to several ancient sources, kept a memento mori beside his bed, a skull placed there deliberately, visible every morning, not as decoration, as philosophy, as the reminder that the man who conquered half the known world was made of the same material as every soldier he had buried. Every morning, before you check your phone, before the machinery of the day starts up, ask yourself one question. If I died tonight, what would I wish I had done differently today? Not what would I have achieved, what would I have been? That answer, honor it, live toward it. Let death be your most honest advisor. Law 4, the law of amor fati. Do not merely accept what happens, learn to desire it. There is a concept in Stoic philosophy so extreme, so counterintuitive, that even students of Stoicism sometimes step back from it. It is not enough, the Stoics argued, to accept your fate with equanimity. The full Stoic position, the position Marcus Aurelius reaches after decades of practice, is amor fati, the love of fate. Not tolerance, not resignation, love. When Marcus Aurelius was 40 years old, a plague arrived in Rome that would kill, by some estimates, 5 million people over the course of his reign. 2 of his children died in the first years of the epidemic. His co-emperor, his closest friend Lucius Verus, died of it. The empire was destabilizing, the Germanic tribes were advancing in the north, and into the middle of all of this Marcus Aurelius wrote in his journal, "Accept the things to which fate binds you, and love the people with whom fate brings you together. Not tolerate, love." How is this possible? How does a man love plague, love loss, love betrayal? The answer requires understanding what the Stoics meant by the logos, the rational principle that organizes the universe. They believed, and this was not merely consolation, but genuine philosophical conviction, that reality is not random, that what happens is always the result of a causal chain so deep and so total that resistance to it is not merely futile, but philosophically incoherent. You cannot wish that yesterday had been different without wishing that the entire causal history of the universe had been different, and to wish that is to wish that you were not yourself. That this moment, this precise, unique, unrepeatable intersection of everything that has ever happened, did not exist. Amor fati is the recognition that every difficulty that has ever found you has also made you. The betrayal that broke you at 23 built the character that saved you at 35. The failure that humiliated you, if you did not run from it, taught you the exact lesson the next chapter of your life required. The loss that seemed like the end was also, in some way, the mind cannot always follow, but the heart eventually knows. A beginning. The Stoic does not pretend the pain is good. He does not perform positivity. He does not Instagram his suffering with a filter that makes it look like growth. He sits with it. He feels it fully. And then he asks the question that transforms it. What is this teaching me, and what will I do with what it teaches? That question is the hinge point. It converts fate from an enemy into a curriculum. Epictetus, whose leg was broken by his master, never regained full use of it. He walked with a limp for the rest of his life, and he became the most influential Stoic teacher in history. The limp did not prevent his greatness. In some way that is impossible to calculate, but very easy to feel. It contributed to it. Because the man who has been broken and remained whole has a credibility that cannot be manufactured. Take the worst thing that has ever happened to you, the one you still carry, and ask, what did I become because of it that I could not have become without it? You don't need to be grateful for the pain, but see clearly what it built. Because what it built is you, and you are not a mistake. Law 5. The law of the present moment. The past is a grave, the future is a fog, power lives only here. Marcus Aurelius in the Meditations returns to one theme more than any other, more than death, more than virtue, more than empire. He returns obsessively to the present moment. He writes about it from every angle, like a man who knows something and keeps finding new words for it because the original words never quite capture how urgent it is. Confine yourself to the present, he writes. And then a few pages later, as if the first instruction hadn't stuck, do not indulge in dreams of what you have not, but count up the chief of the blessings you do have. He understood something about the human mind that neuroscience has spent decades confirming. We almost never live where we are. The anxious mind lives in the future. It runs simulations of catastrophes that have not happened and, in most cases, will not happen. It rehearses disasters. It constructs elaborate worst-case scenarios with the creativity of a novelist and the certainty of a prophet, neither of which it actually is. The grieving mind lives in the past. It replays what was lost, what was said, what cannot now be undone. It is forever turning back toward a door that has already closed. And meanwhile, the only moment that actually exists, the only moment in which action is possible, in which life is actually happening, goes by unwitnessed, unfelt, unlived. The Stoics called this affliction distraction from the Logos, the failure to be fully present to the rational order of this moment, and their prescription was not meditation in the modern spa and candle sense. Their prescription was attention. Total, fierce, disciplined attention to the texture and reality of right now. The Roman historian Plutarch records that when Cato the Younger, a man of almost legendary Stoic discipline, was making a difficult decision, he would go completely still. Not still as in frozen, still as in arrived. Fully in the moment of the decision, not half in the decision and half in what might happen after. All of him present in the exact space where the choice actually lived. There is a phenomenon the Stoics called Chronos versus Kairos. Chronos is clock time, the relentless, indifferent, metronomic march of seconds. Kairos is opportune time, the quality of the moment, its depth, its aliveness. Most people live in Chronos. The Stoic learns to live in Kairos, to find in every ordinary moment the full weight of existence pressing against the present second. Seneca writes one of the most devastating sentences in all philosophical literature. We suffer more in imagination than in reality. Read that again slowly, not once, 3 times, because what he is describing is the mechanism of most modern anxiety. The suffering is real, but its source? It is not the present moment. It is the story you are telling about the present moment, while simultaneously projecting it into a future that hasn't arrived. The present moment is almost always survivable. It is almost always manageable. The mind's extrapolation of it into 3 months from now is where people break. 3 times today. Set a silent alarm if you need to. Stop completely. Not for long. 30 seconds. Look at exactly where you are. Feel the surface beneath you. Notice the quality of the light. Take one breath that belongs entirely to this moment and not to any story you're telling about it. That is Stoic presence. Small, frequent, real. Law 6. The law of voluntary hardship. Choose suffering before it chooses you, and it will never have power over you again. In the year 65 AD, the Emperor Nero ordered Seneca's death. Seneca had been his tutor, his advisor, the man who had for years attempted to govern Nero's worst impulses with wisdom and patience. He had failed. Nero had become what Nero became, and now Nero wanted him dead. A soldier arrived at Seneca's villa. The order was delivered. And Seneca, 70 years old, wealthy beyond imagination, the most celebrated intellectual in Rome, received the news with an equanimity that reportedly stunned the soldier into silence. Because Seneca had been preparing for this his entire life. Not because he knew Nero would kill him, but because he had made a practice, a systematic, deliberate, regular practice of rehearsing deprivation. He slept on the hard floor. He ate the simplest food of the poorest man in Rome. He wore rough clothing, not because he had to. He was one of the richest men alive. He did it because he had understood something the comfortable never do. The thing you fear loses its power the moment you voluntarily encounter it. This is what the Stoics called premeditatio malorum combined with ascesis, the premeditation of evils, combined with voluntary physical discipline. Not pessimism, preemptive courage. You imagine the worst. You practice the discomfort. You choose the friction before fate makes the choice for you. And having chosen it, having walked toward it with open eyes, you discover that it is survivable, that you are more than it. The modern world has built a civilization designed to eliminate discomfort. Temperature-controlled rooms, 2-day delivery, on-demand entertainment. A world in which the human nervous system almost never has to encounter genuine friction. And the result, and this is not a lecture, this is an observable psychological fact, is a population whose threshold for discomfort has dropped to historically unprecedented lows. People lose composure in traffic. People experience existential crisis from a slow Wi-Fi connection. People are destroyed by criticism from strangers on the internet, strangers they will never meet, whose opinions have zero effect on their actual lives, and yet, because they have never been trained, because no one ever put them through the voluntary hardship that builds the specific immunity required to handle involuntary hardship when it inevitably arrives. The Spartans, whose society the Stoics deeply admired, though not uncritically, had a word for this practice, agoge, the systematic education in endurance, not to produce people who enjoyed suffering, to produce people who were free of its grip. Because the person who has slept in the cold does not panic when the heating fails. The person who has fasted does not fall apart when plans change. The person who has sat in discomfort for no reason but training has built a nervous system that does not treat ordinary difficulty as an emergency. Seneca wrote, "Set aside a certain number of days, during which you shall be content with the scantiest and cheapest fare, with coarse and rough dress, saying to yourself the while, 'Is this the condition that I feared? Is this what I feared? Is this it?' This week, choose one discomfort you would normally avoid. The cold shower, the skipped meal, the social situation that makes you nervous, the conversation you've been delaying. Walk toward it. Not because you enjoy it, because on the other side of it is a version of you that is measurably freer than the version that walked away." Law 7. The Law of Sympathia. You are not separate from the world. Your peace depends on understanding this. There is a concept in Stoic cosmology that never quite makes it into the self-help summaries, and its absence is a philosophical loss. The Stoics called it sympathia, a Greek word meaning something like resonance or cosmic interconnection. The idea that all things in the universe are not separate objects colliding in empty space, but parts of a single living organism, threads of the same fabric, notes in the same composition. Marcus Aurelius writes, "What injures the hive injures the bee." He was a Roman emperor writing about bees. But what he was actually writing about was the metaphysical nature of human beings, that we are not fundamentally individuals who occasionally encounter other individuals. We are expressions of a collective existence, and to treat other people as obstacles, enemies, or irrelevancies is not just morally wrong, It is a philosophical error, a failure to understand what you are. This changes how you receive difficulty from other people. The person who cut you off in traffic, when viewed through sympatheia, is not an enemy. He is a node in the same network you are part of. His hurry, his carelessness, his anxiety, they came from somewhere. They are the product of conditions, of history, of a story you cannot see. To rage at him is to rage at a weather pattern. It is philosophically incoherent, and it costs you your peace for no return. The Stoic philosopher Heracles described human community as a series of concentric circles, you at the center, then your family, then your community, then your city, then your country, then humanity. And the Stoic project of moral development, he argued, was the practice of drawing those outer circles closer, of learning to care for strangers with the warmth you bring to those nearest you. This is not sentiment. The Stoics were not sentimental. It is calculation, the recognition that your own flourishing is inseparable from the flourishing of the whole, that a man who lives only for himself has not identified his self correctly, because the self, the real self, the one beneath the social mask and the ego architecture, is not an isolated unit. It is a relationship, a verb, not a noun. When Cato the Elder walked through the streets of Rome and was told that a law benefiting the poor had passed, he reportedly said, "Good. What good is my wealth if Rome is diseased?" He had understood something that many wealthy, powerful people never do, that your personal condition exists within a larger condition, and the larger condition always wins in the end. The practical Stoic implication is this: treat every person you encounter as if they are a fellow student in the same school you attend. Not as a teacher, necessarily, not as a superior, but as someone working through the same curriculum. The rudeness of strangers is not malice aimed at you. It is the output of private suffering you cannot see. The impatience, the anger, the cruelty, they are almost always self-inflicted wounds that have spilled outward. In your next difficult interaction with another person, whether a stranger, a colleague, or someone close, try to spend 30 seconds genuinely wondering what they might be carrying, not to excuse their behavior, not to become passive, but to loosen the story that their behavior is about you, because it almost never is. Law 8. The law of the Logos. The universe is rational. Your suffering is not random. Trust the structure. In 399 BC, the philosopher Socrates was tried by the Athenian democracy for corrupting the youth and impiety against the gods. He was 70 years old. He had spent his entire life in service to philosophy, to truth, to the examined life he believed was the only life worth living. And after a trial that many historians regard as a travesty of justice, he was sentenced to death by drinking hemlock. His students begged him to flee. He refused, not because he was suicidal, not because he was resigned, but because Socrates had looked at the structure of reality, at what the Stoics would later formalize as the Logos, the rational ordering principle of the universe, and concluded that what was happening was not a mistake, that even injustice, encountered with dignity, served something larger than the moment could reveal. He drank the hemlock with a composure his students never forgot, and wrote about, and transmitted across 2,000 years to us. That is how an idea survives, not by being pleasant, by being true. The Stoic concept of logos is simultaneously the most abstract and the most practical idea in the entire tradition. In the abstract, it is the belief that the universe is not chaos, that it operates according to a rational principle so total and so consistent that nothing, no event, no loss, no apparent catastrophe, falls outside its logic. In practice, it means this: when something goes wrong, the first Stoic question is not, "Why is this happening to me?" The Stoic's first question is, "What is the nature of this moment, and what does it ask of me?" The shift is subtle but total. The first question positions you as a victim of an irrational universe. The second positions you as a participant in a rational one. The first generates resentment. The second generates agency. Chrysippus of Soli, the third head of the Stoic school, the man who systematized Stoic logic so rigorously that it influenced formal logic until the 19th century, wrote about what he called fate as a cylinder rolling down a hill. You can push the cylinder. You can redirect it slightly, but you cannot make it a cube. The nature of the thing is what it is, and the Stoics' wisdom is in understanding that distinction between what can be shaped and what must be accepted, and between acceptance that is defeat and acceptance that is mastery. Epictetus said, "Seek not that the things which happen should happen as you wish, but wish the things which happen to be as they are, and you will have a tranquil flow of life." This is not a command to be passive. It is a command to be precise about where your energy goes. The tranquility he describes is not the tranquility of the uninvolved. It is the tranquility of the person who has correctly identified what they can change, and who then changes it with everything they have, without the emotional bleeding that comes from simultaneously wishing that reality were structured differently. The next time something goes against your plans, something genuinely frustrating, not merely inconvenient, stop before you react and ask a single question. What would a rational person who trusts the structure of things do right now? Not a passive person, a rational one. The answer to that question is almost always clearer, calmer, and more effective than whatever the automatic emotional response would have produced. Law 9. The law of moral gravity. What you do when no one is watching is who you actually are. In the year 180 AD, Marcus Aurelius died. He had been emperor for nearly 20 years. He had governed the most powerful empire in human history through plague, through war, through conspiracy and betrayal. And when historians later examined his personal writings, journals he never intended anyone to read, written to himself, by himself, in the private hours before dawn, what they found was astonishing. Not the self-congratulation of a powerful man, not the justifications or rationalizations that power usually produces. What they found was a man holding himself accountable with a ferocity that most people never direct at anyone. Writing things like, "Begin the morning by saying to thyself, I shall meet with the busybody, the ungrateful, arrogant, deceitful, envious, unsocial," not to prepare resentment, to prepare patience, to go into the day forewarned, so that when he encountered the difficult person, and he always did, he would not be surprised into reaction, but ready for compassion. He wrote, "If it is not right, do not do it. If it is not true, do not say it." To himself, alone, in the dark, with no one watching. This is the law of moral gravity. The Stoic conviction that character is not performance. It is not what you display when observation might reward you for it. It is what happens in the private laboratory of unwitnessed moments, when there is no applause possible, no audience present, no reputation at stake. The Stoic term for this is kailon, the beautiful and the good, always inseparably linked. The idea that the virtuous action is not just morally correct, it is by its nature beautiful. That there is an aesthetic to integrity, a rightness to it that the person of character feels in their bones, not because they were told to, but because they have cultivated the sensitivity to recognize it. Cato the Younger was legendary in Rome, not for his victories but for his refusals. He refused bribes when others took them. He refused luxury when others indulged. He walked the streets of Rome in a simple toga when Roman senators dressed in purple. Not to make a point to others, to make a point to himself, to maintain the alignment between his values and his actions so precisely that no gap could open for compromise to creep through. The danger the Stoics feared most was not external catastrophe. External catastrophe they could handle, had handled, would handle again. The danger they feared was gradual moral erosion, the small surrenders, the compromises that each seem reasonable in isolation, but that, accumulated over time, produce a man who no longer recognizes himself in the mirror. Seneca writes, "I do not regard a man as poor if the little which remains is enough for him." The real poverty, he understood, was not in the wallet, it was in the will. In the man who had gradually traded so much of himself for convenience, approval, or comfort, that there was no longer enough of him left to be worth anything. Choose one value, one thing you claim to believe about how a person should live, and spend 1 week measuring yourself against it privately. Not publicly, not performatively, just you and your own honest assessment in the quiet before sleep. You will discover quickly where the gap between declared values and actual behavior lives. That gap is not something to shame yourself about. It is the exact location where your growth is available. Law 10. The law of the unshakable self. The final goal is not to be unmoved, it is to be immovable. There is a difference so important that the entire Stoic project depends on understanding it, between being unmoved and being immovable. The unmoved person has simply not been tested yet. He has had the good fortune of circumstances that did not require depth. He is calm, the way a lake is calm in the absence of wind. That is not a character. That is a weather condition. The immovable person has been moved, has been shaken, has in many cases been temporarily broken, and has rebuilt himself, not from scratch, but from deeper foundations, has learned, through the specific curriculum of his particular losses, what he is made of, has arrived at a relationship with his own nature so clear, so honest, so undeceived, that external turbulence no longer has access to his center. This is what the Stoics called eudaimonia. It is translated inadequately as happiness, but its literal Greek meaning is something closer to the flourishing of a good daimon, the thriving of your deepest, truest self. Not pleasure, not comfort, not success in the world's accounting, the full, undistorted expression of who you most essentially are. Marcus Aurelius, near the end of the Meditations, writes a passage that stops philosophers cold. He writes, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." The word he uses for strength, dynamis, is the same word the Greek mathematicians used for the power of a number to generate other numbers. It is generative power, creative power, the power not just to withstand, but to produce, to make something from the material of your own life. The unshakable self is not the self that avoids life. It is the self that has walked into the hardest parts of life and returned, each time, more itself, more clear, more present, less governed by the needs of the ego, which requires constant external validation to believe it exists, and more anchored in the logos, in the rational, ordered, coherent nature that was always already there, waiting beneath the noise. The Stoic philosopher Posidonius, who taught in Rhodes in the 1st century BC, described the goal of philosophy as living in agreement with nature. And by nature, he did not mean living in a forest. He meant living in agreement with the deepest nature of what you are, the reasoning animal, the social animal, the animal capable of stepping back from its own impulses and asking, "Is this worth it? Is this true? Is this who I intend to be?" That question, "Is this who I intend to be?" is the whole of the Stoic project in 7 words. Not, "Am I safe?" Not, "Am I comfortable?" Not, "Am I winning?" Not, "Are they watching?" Not, "Are they approving?" Is this who I intend to be? Because the Stoics discovered something that no amount of external success can produce, and no amount of external failure can take away. The experience of choosing yourself, of looking at the menu of possible responses the world is offering you in this moment, The anger, the panic, the resentment, the shutdown, the performance, and choosing instead yourself. The calm one, the curious one, the compassionate but boundaried one, the one who acts from values rather than from wounds. That choice, made once, is inspiring. Made 100 times, it is a habit. Made 1,000 times, it is a character. And character, the Stoics were absolutely certain of this, is the only possession that cannot be lost. Flame cannot burn it. Exile cannot remove it. Time cannot erode it. It is the thing that remains when everything else has been taken. Marcus Aurelius lost children. He lost his closest friend. He governed through plague and war. He was surrounded by people who wanted what he had and would have destroyed him to get it. And at the end of his reign, he wrote no memoirs. He sought no monuments. He left only a journal, addressed to no one, containing the private record of a man who had spent his entire life trying, imperfectly, repeatedly, honestly, to be worth the name human. That is the Stoic inheritance. That is what is available to you. Not perfection, not imperviousness, not the absence of pain or grief or anger or fear, but the capacity, built through practice, sustained through philosophy, earned through the voluntary confrontation with every difficulty life places in